India's position, our assessment. India has been engaged in the ongoing negotiations for many months in Geneva with all sincerity and in the most constructive of manners. India has made an acknowledged contribution in taking forward not only the agenda for this meeting in Geneva, but also on all the three pillars, the three main issues on which negotiations were going on, to arrive at a solution which is acceptable, which embraces all. We live in a world where countries have different levels of development and the challenges differ from a nation to nation and continent to continent. But a vast majority of the world lives in poor countries, in developing countries, in Asia, in Africa, in South Americas and the Caribbean. It is a fact that those engaged in agriculture in these countries happen to be resource poor and subsistence farmers. Where agriculture, technologies in many of the poor countries, not in India, may not be as it is available for farming in many of the developed countries. But at the same time, for a country like India, and when we talk of this, we talk on behalf of similarly placed countries whom I will refer to as our partners in this coalition of countries which are developing, countries which have a challenge of food security, countries which have the issues concerning the subsistence farmers. This is one issue which we thought should be and needs to be addressed so that the past distortions can be corrected by putting in place, through consensus, a negotiated agreement which allays the apprehensions of the developing countries and the poor countries, particularly with regard to their vulnerability to archaic rules or dated rules. As India has maintained throughout, right to food security is non-negotiable. This is a right which the United Nations recognizes and that's why United Nations has a rapporteur on hunger and food security, Mr. Shooter. And regularly the reports are presented on hunger and food security issues to the United Nations. We also have a commitment to the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. The countries which are represented in the WTO are also signatories, have also made commitments to the MDGs, as well as to the right to food. Therefore, any decision which we make while putting in place the agreements, particularly on agriculture, on food security, have to be in harmony with the MDGs and the right to food security, cannot and must not be in conflict with these noble goals of the global community as a whole. With these noble goals of the global community as a whole. This is a principled position for India, and it should not be misinterpreted as India entering into a dispute. We have urged, with respect, all members to consider this aspect so that the decisions that we make resonate in the poor and the developing countries where people are genuinely concerned as to what will emerge out of Bali. In India, we have a food security program, and the public stock holding for food security is the proposal which is under discussion. There are other issues, trade facilitation, and also the LDC issues. Out of the 10 texts which were negotiated in Geneva, these are draft texts. India has endorsed 8. This is just to underscore that India is as much committed as any other nation to have a successful outcome in Bali. But at the same time, there are issues on trade facilitation where some countries, including India, may be required to change the domestic laws, and countries find it difficult to make those commitments. However, these are areas, this particular chapter, India has very successfully steered the negotiations in Geneva. The crunch is the issue of public stock holding for food security. I would like to explain to you the manner in which this issue is addressed under the WTO agreement and rules. The countries are allowed to have public stock holding, public procurement, but there is a threshold called the de minimis. Now this is linked to the past agreement, the Uruguay Round Agreement, and for the calculation purposes, our chief negotiator later and the ambassador to WTO will step in if more clarification will be required. So for the calculation purposes of de minimis, the reference prices that are used of 1986 to 1988. So in 2013, all our countries have to calculate the de minimis for the eligible procurement based on 1986 to 1988 prices. We have been pleading that these prices need to be updated. First, the last agreement was a flawed agreement. It had an inherent imbalance loaded against the developing countries, loaded against the poor countries. And in 2013, if this is considered to be unreasonable, to urge everyone to at least change 29-year-old prices for calculation, because most of the countries have seen escalation of prices. If anybody says that the food prices have not changed in the last 3 decades, I most respectfully would strongly disagree with that. Now what India procures is from the subsistence farmers. And when we talk of eligible production, it's not that what India produces, India procures. India trades also, domestic and globally. So it's only a limited percentage of the food grain produced by the farmers or the different staple foods which are procured to feed the poor people. It is procured at a MSP, that is the minimum support price. It is not income support or market support which developed countries have as a practice been doing for decades. And what is procured is distributed as part of the food security. Until recently, it was through the public distribution system, where subsidized food grain, whether cereals, are made available to the poor people so that they don't go hungry to bed. Indian Parliament has enacted a Food Security Act. It is a legal entitlement given to our citizens, and approximately 700 million plus Indians, our citizens, are legally entitled, and the government is bound and obliged to ensure that the prescribed, notified quantity of food per month is made available as per their legal entitlement. We cannot possibly be expected to negotiate something which is in direct conflict with our food security. India is not the only country which gives MSP to its farmers. Large number of countries, and we have the list, which have the similar program, at least 15 odd countries, if not more, have notified schemes for food security and public procurement. We have been discussing a number of possible options so that we come, while negotiating these things, to the second decade of the 21st century and not be held hostage to the 1980s. We are willing to and open to discuss the trade facilitation, because India itself has been committed. We have taken a number of steps over the years to rationalize and simplify when it comes to trade rules, to update our own infrastructure, induct the latest of technologies, to cut down transaction costs, simplification of custom rules. We have electronically linked all our export-import terminals. There is electronic data interchangeability which is done. The entire trading component, when it comes to filing, when it comes to determination or payment of fees to the bank or duties, and the bank realization certificates, it's all electronic in India. So when we are talking about it, we understand the use of simplifying trade, faster shipments, which helps countries which produce. I would also like to add, before I rest my opening statement, that India has been talking to various groups and our coalition partners and key stakeholders. We have had a number of negotiations with the EU, with the United States of America, and also with the Africa group, with the ACP group, with the LDCs. In the past also, when there has been a shared concern over the stalemate in the Doha round of negotiations, it was India which took the initiative, and I had the honor of hosting as India's minister the ministers and leaders in New Delhi in September 2009 with an effort and objective to re-energize the stalled talks, and it did help as the negotiators returned to Geneva. India is for the strengthening of the multilateral trading system. India stands for the strengthening of the WTO. We are for a rule-based multilateral trade system which corrects historical distortions, which is fair, which is just, and which is equitable. Thank you.
Sam Gilston with Washington Tariff and Trade Letter.